All right, everybody. So this week is all about serial killers.
I
All
like
right.
the way you say that.
So,
Right.
and we needed to choose something that sort of like meant, I guess it meant something to us. All right.
Mhm.
So my book is The Son of Sam and Me by Carl De Niro and Brian Whitney. Sacheen, what's your book?
My book is Madame LaLaurie, Mistress of the Haunted House. Oh,
Denise?
sorry,
And
by Carolyn
mine,
Morrow Long. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah, I don't have mine up, so bear with me. And I'm still in the middle of reading it. But mine is called Hope. I will look up the whole thing. It is by Amanda Berry and Gina De Jesus, and it's not serial killer, but it was about kidnappings in Cleveland, and it is the survivor's tale of that. So,
okay. That's interesting because the book that I chose, Carl De Niro, was a survivor of Son of Sam. Okay.
mm,
So I chose this particular book for a couple of reasons. All right. Because so when I did the search on Audible, only a couple came up, and one was 12 hours, and the other one was like 4.5. So that was plus in that column. And also, the other books were more like sort of like like chronologically what went on, and this one was from a survivor, so a different perspective. Right. Son of Sam happened when I was like around 15 years old in Yonkers. So it was something that was even still very, very fresh in my mind that this was going on. Right. So it is chronological in the events that would happen, but there's a very, very different perspective on who the Son of Sam really is. Right. So now, being from Yonkers, and this is where experience of where I live comes in. I was fully aware that the Yonkers Police Department, all right, um, had rules for some people and different rules for other people. Okay, and who their friends were, and who there was a lot of that going on. Okay, and I can't speak for the New York City police because I really didn't have any real experience with the New York City Police Department until I actually needed, and that's another story, which I'll tell you guys off screen. Okay. So anyway, Son of Sam. All right, so I'm 15 years old, and the whole premise of this book is that he did not act alone.
Mm,
That there was definitely more than one,
mm.
and a lot of the things that he brings up as a teenager in Yonkers, it's very familiar to me. Like, for example, it was like normal people don't go to Untermeyer Park in the evening because we know the Satanists are there.
Mm.
Okay. And I don't mean the Satanist body autonomy looking to salvage your human rights Satanists. I'm talking about the Satanists that do sacrifice and kill dogs and do all sorts of nasty things.
mm,
That's a group of Satanists. Okay.
Okay.
Something involved with something called the Process Church, which I just found out like a couple of weeks ago that the Process Church actually merged into Best Friends Animal Sanctuary.
oh,
Yeah, Google that.
mm,
Okay.
So I know where any of my donation dollars are not going to. All right. So it went into the different timelines and how, that the police department just really wanted to solve this so badly. All right. So that when they caught up with David Berkowitz, all right, and he fully confessed, they didn't take it any further.
Mm.
Okay. So that was really interesting, which really brings us back to that, my neighbor who I thought was Son of Sam could still be part of that group. And just saying.
I mean, we'll never know. We'll never
I
know.
that's
never
yeah.
know.
We'll never know. Could be, but we'll never know.
The book was an enjoyable read. Okay.
Okay.
So, and a lot of it brought up things like, oh yeah, I remember that, or I remember that, or I remember that from that era.
Would you read it? Would you read it again?
Yeah, I would read it again. Well, I already read it. I rarely reread books. Okay.
Mhm.
So in this books, I will absolutely reread. Some really fun books, I will absolutely reread. I probably won't reread this one, but I did enjoy it and I would recommend it.
Shall I go next?
Go ahead, unless you have
Go
some
for it.
questions on a Sam you want answered.
Um, I know, I mean, I read a ton about Son of Sam, so I don't have a ton of questions about him per se. I do agree, though. I always thought was at least one other person potentially helping Berkowitz. I don't know that I thought there was another killer per se, but that somebody was helping him not get caught. That's what I always thought, just on what I read about the case.
Well, there was a lot of that going on, and from the book, there was multiple shooters.
Hmm.
Now, according to the book, David Berkowitz was at all of the shootings,
Right.
but he wasn't the shooter at all of the shootings.
Interesting. Okay.
And that more than one, there was like several people involved with this.
See, I don't know because I think about the so when I lived on Long Island, I learned about the was it the Gilgo Beach murders that happened in that quarter along Long Island and how ultimately it really was all one person. But as it was unfolding, the idea that it could be more than one because of just so many different things happening. But in the end, all the pieces really did fit that one person.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Mhm.
All right, Sacheen, your book.
All right, well, we're taking a long trip back in time to the 19th century. New Orleans, Louisiana, post um, French transfer to Spanish before the U.S. took it over. So that kind of window of time frame to a story so I was looking for female serial killers, which are not very many, um, at least that are written about. They're I think they're probably more prolific than we would imagine that they would be, but there's not a lot written about them, and so I didn't want to do the ones that seem to be the most famous, for lack of a better word, like Eileen Voorhees, um, and I forget the I'm gonna forget a couple of them, but there are two or three that always seem to come to the top. But if you happen to go to New Orleans, which I've been to several times, you will hear the tale of the Laura LaRue mansion and the monster of Laura LaRue. And so I thought I would read one of the books out about her, happened to be written by the author of another book that I liked. So I checked it out. And it's called Madame Lola Rue, Mistress of the Haunted House. And she was prolific. She is credited with killing um, at least 12, potentially hundreds of more. But because her victims were slaves, enslaved peoples, the accurate number is never going to be known. And the reason she even rises to infamy is because in the mansion in New Orleans, so in New Orleans, I don't know if you've been to New Orleans, but it's it's a tight little town. Like if you're out in Louisiana, the big plantations, yes, but in New Orleans proper, it's a tight little town. They had a mansion, a two-story mansion in New Orleans. So they had money. She comes from wealth. She was a very wealthy woman. She married 3 times, had 5 kids, um, and was just extraordinarily wealthy. And her last husband was a doctor whom she married in, I forget what year it was. We're talking 1800s here, 1820s. He was 15 years younger than she was, which was already an interesting um, concept given the time frame. But interestingly enough, before I get into her diabolicalness, interestingly enough, she was born Marie Delphine McCarty, and per laws during that time, every time she married, her name wasn't given to her husband. She was always known as Delphine McCarty. And the McCarty, and then you would just add on wife of one husband, wife of the next husband, wife of the next husband. And then when they died, she just kept her name. In that way, she kept all of her money. And so, unlike English laws, which stripped the woman of their property and their agency once she married, the Spanish and French laws were much more egalitarian. So she was able to keep all of her monies as she married, and then as her husbands, they all died, by the way. Just for the record, they all died. Um, so, but even so, then as her husband's married, she got their money as well. But it's a fascinating concept that this little woman who married her first husband at 13, he was 28. So, yes, agency, but also not so much, right? So, marries her first husband at 13, ends up in Louisiana, married to the third husband. So, here's what happened. On April 10th of 1834, there was a fire in the Laureley mansion. And in the course of that fire, there was discovered seven people in an attic. And the seven people in that attic were all, at the time of the fire, still living and were being systematically tortured in the attic of this home. And what came out was that in the years leading up to the fire, the Laureley mansion was kind of known as a place where the enslaved people seemed to be disappearing, but no one could really pinpoint where they were going or what was happening. During the course of a 4-year period, at least 12 deaths are recorded that they could prove, but they died of various things. Now, think about this. You live in New Orleans in a 2-story house. You might have 2 or 3 servants, maybe even 6 or 7, but you're in the city. 12 deaths. 12 deaths are recorded. One death spawned an investigation. This is a young servant girl, 8 years old, who unfortunately threw herself off the roof to prevent getting punished by Mistress Laureley. And that death prompted an investigation. After that investigation, in which they were found to be unnecessarily cruel to their slaves were removed. 9 more slaves were removed from that. So 12 deaths, 9 slaves removed. We're talking, now we're into the 20s. All of these enslaved people are in this house. So the 9 slaves were removed, but someone in her family, and she was not allowed to have any more slaves. Someone in her family bought them back for her and gave them back to her. So April 10th, the cook of the mansion set the house on fire. She was chained to the stove and she was trying to get free. So she sets the house on fire. And in the course of them getting into the house and, figuring out who's doing what to whom, her third husband dies, but the 7 slaves in the attic are discovered. And she flees on a boat to Paris that night. She runs away because the state of the 7 in the attic, the details of what she did to them, are so grotesque that I'm not going to say them on this broadcast. But I will say this. Having read a number of accounts of this particular, what some people think is a ghost story, is actually very true story, is enough to make your hair turn white. They did horrible things to the people in the attic. And they can only, and so the 7 are liberated. 2 died. So there's 14 deaths attributed to this one household, this one woman. And then, like I said, she dies and she doesn't die. She flees to Paris the night of the fire. She manages to get on a boat and flees to Paris and just never comes back. She eventually dies in Paris at the age of 63, I believe. The book itself is a really good objective perspective on the woman. Some people call her the Mad Madam, and some, because there was mental illness in her family. Some people just think she was a monster. There is a 2 schools of thought on if she was truly a sadistic creature or was she suffering some kind of mental illness that pushed her to be whom she turned out to be. I'll let you decide that. The book is a really interesting read if you like details. She's very good about ferreting out some of the details because there's a lot of swirling stories around this woman. And there's a ghost tour. If you go to New Orleans, you can take the ghost tour of the house. Like she's pretty famous because, again, there aren't very many serial killers who are women. And if if the stories are true, she was prolific in her torture and killing of a large number of people with no consequences because she had enough money to flee. This would have been 19th century. They weren't going to bring her back from Paris to stand trial, right? The people in New Orleans proper apparently knew of her. At one point, I was reading, it said her slaves kept disappearing and they had a lot of slaves. And again, they lived in New Orleans proper, so the amount of slaves they had was already odd, and then they just would disappear. There'd be two or three that used to run errands, and then there was just one who was now running errands, and no one really knew where the rest of them had gone. So the book itself, if you are not, if you don't like detail, don't read this book. She goes into a lot of detail. She tries very hard to present as factual account as she can. And she does a really good job at that. It's a little dry in places, but she does a really good job at least presenting the information. I think she goes too far in trying to show that there might be a mental illness component. I don't think she
Mm.
proves that with her research. I think she gives a little bit too much credence to an unproven assumption. And I think that's simply because no, if you read this book, if you read any of the books about this woman or you listen to any of the accounts, you want to believe there had to be something wrong with her to do what she did. But I don't know that we can assume that there was something wrong with her to do what she did. So the book is definitely worth the read. I definitely think that you would enjoy it. I would only read it once and not have a strong stomach.
That sounds
So
interesting. I like that.
that's her.
All right, Denise, what did you read?
So, I looked it up, Hope, the Memoirs of Survival in Cleveland. And this one, I was trying to figure out because when we were talking about serial killers, I don't really follow true crime and stuff. And we have Jeffrey Dahmer around here. And I'm like, "Ugh, there has to be something better." And like Jeffrey Dahmer. And now, mind you, that was like 20 minutes away. I know people who went to school with him, like all the things. But um, I remembered when it was shortly after. So in 2003, so I would have been 22, somewhere around there, 22, 23. I remember that there was a case, a very public case of a girl named Amanda Berry who went missing, and it was very in the area. It was televised a lot. It was very high interest across the board, and she had went missing just one day after school. Her mom was very much into making sure she was in the public eye, trying to find her, and all these things. And I sort of remember Amanda Berry being mentioned back then, but early 20s, not really paying attention to news, but I remember hearing about it. Fast forward 10 years later, and all of a sudden, the newscasters were reporting in 2013 that Amanda Berry had somehow opened the door of where she was being held captive and got someone's attention. And his name was Charles Ramsey. And he went over and was able to, there were three girls. So there was Amanda Berry. A year later, there was Gina De Jesus. And no one really heard of Michelle Knight, but she was the girl a year before Amanda Berry. So no one really reported her missing and stuff. So it wasn't as high of investigation or anything. And all three of these ladies were found 10 years later, um, living in this guy's house, chained to radiators, being raped multiple times daily. Um, Amanda Berry had a 6-year-old daughter that was his. And it was a whole watching the camaraderie afterwards. Now, you knew that there was a lot of manipulation. So, like Michelle Knight was most certainly isolated from the other two. And she went and did her own thing, and Amanda Berry and Gina De Jesus did theirs. And when I was trying to figure out, I didn't know if there was any books on this, and I ended up finding these books, and I was debating about the memoirs because it's written by Amanda Berry and Gina De Jesus. And Amanda Berry did almost like daily journal entries for 10 years. Um, and it's both their recollection of everything and what they saw and what they heard. So he obviously turned everyone against them and stuff. But this book is about that. Or they do have a really, from what I understand, in depth book written by one of the detectives who actually worked the case and was trying to help. And I've heard that, and this one is definitely, it skates over. It's all about how they survived without the details. So you know some details, but they don't go into it. They didn't want that to be their story. So it is a good read if you want something to sort of learn about how they survived in all of this. The mental side of everything is very intriguing because I didn't know anything of like the whole case. So he ended up going to trial, going to jail, and then hung himself a month later. So like and it goes through his background. I didn't know his background. So he was from Puerto Rico. He had a history of being sexually abused when he was a young kid, history of domestic violence with his wife, almost killing her. And the connection was all three of these ladies knew one of his children. And it was really easy for him to abduct them. And so it's just really interesting to hear um, the history behind it, how they survived, what it was sort of like in there. Like I'm at the point now, I'm not all the way through, but Amanda Berry just had her baby. And it's like this weird, what we wouldn't be able to fathom. She wants to be with him. The baby keeps her alive and going, even though he's the dad. And it's this weird tear of, I know I should not like him and I don't like him, but him and want him. So it's been very interesting. And in the book, the way that it all happened after when they got out, it definitely seemed like Gina and Amanda were closer than Michelle and the rest of them, or those two. And reading in the book that, he actually kept Gina and Michelle together, chained up together, and separated them that way. So they were bonding and laughing while Amanda Berry heard that. So obviously there was a lot of animosity. So like just hearing the mental struggle without all the gory details is very interesting. And it's all about survival. I mean, they were chained up to radiators around their stomachs with food being withheld and having to go to the bathroom and a bucket in the room and all the things for 10 years. And now there's like this baby that was brought into it. So she was 6 when they got rescued. So
I got a question.
uh-huh.
Was this at his home where his wife and kids lived, or he had a separate location?
So he was not with his ex-wife.
Okay.
She was out of the picture and it was at
Okay.
his house. He boarded up. He always had, and it was in a very very urban part of Cleveland, but he had everything boarded up. He always had music playing. But what's really interesting is there were so many cases. So he was having domestic violence charges brought up against him, or other charges brought up against him, and cops were at his house while the girls were there. Or his daughters would come over and he would move them into like the garage. So like there were people in and out of that house, and he was just a normal person, and no one was the wiser knowing that he had the 2 girls that were missing. Amanda's Berry mom actually ended up, she saw her mom die on the news. Her mom died of a heart attack and stuff like that. So she was locked up, and that her mom had passed away. She also watched show, or I think it was Maury. And Sylvia Brown was on there. If you guys know who she is, she's like the famous psychic who
Oh, yeah.
tries to find missing people. And she told her that Amanda Berry was deceased. So she saw her mom just crumble. Like she was watching, they were allowed to watch TV, and she was making recordings of watching the vigils and watching her mom just give up, and watched on TV that her mom passed away and all these things. So it's just crazy to think. And I'm only 4 years into this 10 years in this storyline. So it's scary to think that it could be right there. And it was all neighbor, like they all knew each other and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big one. Yeah, 10 years later, I'll never forget. And if you want to watch a really funny video, Charles Ramsey is the one. And I knew something was wrong when a white girl ran into the arms of a black man or something
I've
like that
seen that
outside
video.
McDonald's.
Yeah,
Oh,
I've
yes,
seen that video before.
that's the case.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay.
case.
Well, I kept thinking
Hmm.
this sounds familiar to me. I feel like I've heard this before, and I had
That's
seen that
why.
video. And he said it was obviously there was something up because this little white girl just all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
little white girl, like,
she's, I got she's not where she's supposed to be. So yeah, I do
uh-huh.
remember that video. Wow.
Yep. So
Okay.
that's the whole story. And that was like 20 minutes away in Cleveland. So I figured it was something that I sort of remembered. I didn't really remember Jeffrey Dahmer or anything. And I just thought it was a little bit different than just maybe a normal serial killer and just the survival aspect of it.
You
It's
know,
a good book, I would say.
so with the Son of Sam book, right? We always thought, well, I always thought that the victims were random. And it turns out that they were not that random. So
Hmm.
anyway, so that was a fun topic this week.
It was interesting.
It is, yes.
Definitely was interesting. I mean,
Hmm.
honestly, it was one of those where I was like I told you, I think we were discussing this. I was really like, I want something that no one has really talked about. I want something that I don't know enough about to go,
Hmm.
yeah, BTK, Green River, Ted Bundy, like you just know all the names, right? Because they're everywhere, no matter what. And so to I was like, I remember this story. So let me go check it out and see if it's really I'm surprised how true this story is.
All right, so the
Hmm.
American Horror Story, the series,
Yes, I hear they did something with
Mm.
this.
they did something on that. That was, I'm not a huge fan of that show.
I haven't watched that show since the first season.
Yeah, I watched the first season and not been a huge fan of it, but I did watch that one, and I had a hard time watching it.
I didn't watch that one, but I did when I was doing the research around the story. Um, they did mention that Kathy Bates, I guess, is who
Yeah.
played
Oh,
her,
yeah,
did a phenomenal job with the depiction of her,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
what they talked about in there was so bad, and it wasn't even as bad as it really was. And I was like, how on earth did they do that on television? This woman was sadistic in just horrifying ways, just horrifying ways. And I one of the reasons why I wanted to pick a woman, like I said, there just aren't that many of them. But she got away. She literally, the
Hmm.
night her house burned to the ground, she just got on a boat and went to Paris and managed to live out the rest of her life. Like Bundy gets put in jail, this guy gets caught. All these people, the reason we know about them is because something happened to them, and we know the story in hindsight now. Whereas this woman just got to go, this woman was actively killing her enslaved people, and people were talking about it, but there was nothing they could do about it. And until the woman chained at the stove just said, I can't take it anymore, and burned the house down, knowing that she would probably die. That's the only way this stopped. And then she just got on a boat and left.
So I guess my thought is, did she continue doing that in France?
So the little bit that she talks about in the book is that when she got to Paris, she moved back. So I think her mother and her two sisters were in Paris and they were all married. She didn't get up to her shenanigans. I think it's because her victim of choice would not have been there. So in the Americas, chattel slavery, they were property, they belonged to you. What people did with them was their business because there was nothing preventing you from doing that. But in Europe, that would not have been exactly the case. There would not have been a ready source of people or like, that she could enslave and then make disappear. So the last anyone really talks about is that her life there just seemed to be quiet, for lack of a better word. She wanted to come back to America, and I think she wrote a letter to someone here, an uncle or something, who had just said, "Nope, you should not come back." It would be very bad for you. I think if she had come back, she might have gotten on trial. But at the time, she had so much money that I don't even think if she came back, it would have mattered.
Mm.
Okay, so on that note, we'll be
But
back.
she did die by a wild boar, if that helps.
Oh, okay.
Yes. She was gored by a wild boar.
All right.
Interesting. See?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's how she went out.
Oh, a little bit of karma.
A little bit of justice.
Okay, so our next book club is Sunday, February 8th.
Correct. Mhm.
Our topic is going to be on anxiety.
Correct.
Okay.
I got it.
All right. So we'll see everybody in a couple of weeks.